So this lecture is called Challenges and Opportunities for Russia's Foreign Policy to 2030. Well, unlike yesterday, I would want to give more time to questions and answers, more time for interactive discussion. I think I'm guilty for speaking far too long in the first lecture. So this will be more evenly shared between you and me. I will first talk about the challenges and then a bit about the opportunities, and I think at the end we will have maybe 30 minutes, maybe 40 minutes. We will have a discussion of the entire topic of Russian foreign policy, whether it's the past, the present, or the future. So let me say that in terms of challenges, I see Russia going forward immensely challenged. It's challenged economically, as we all know. The country has not been able to embark on a path of growth for the past decade. This results in people's incomes plunging by about 10% compared to the level where they were a decade ago. In my view, this is very much the product of the politico-economic system that still reigns in Russia, and that privileges those who have political connections and puts at a disadvantage anyone and everyone who doesn't have the connections. And to me, this is not an economic problem per se. This is very much a politico-economic problem. And please do not misunderstand me. I do not link it specifically to moving from an authoritarian model to a democratic model. I'm talking primarily about governance and about the involvement of the bureaucracy in economic life, and this nexus of power and property, which is clearly stifling. It's even more stifling at the level of smaller communities, smaller towns, the oblasts, where you have one or two people with monopoly power and everyone else essentially put at a disadvantage. Under economic challenges, I would highlight the challenge, in particular, I would highlight the challenge of energy transition, carbon neutrality, which has been declared as a goal by the Europeans, the Americans, the Chinese, and scores of other countries around the world, but primarily those three presents a particularly difficult challenge for Russia, which continues to be inordinately dependent on its oil and gas exports to the outside world. And these exports, again, there are different views, different assessments of the situation today and the situation a decade ago. Some people take, let's say, a more relaxed attitude. Others are much more alarmist. Maybe the truth lies between those two extremes, but it's clear that things are moving in the direction in which Russian revenues from energy sales will substantially go down. And with all the consequences for the domestic economy and for the well-being of the Russian people. Next to economic challenges, I would highlight technological challenge. Russia, and I say that not only with regret, but with a lot of shame, Russia lost the edge that the Soviet Union did have in quite a number of fields. The 1990s were a particularly difficult period for Russian science and technology, which were decimated essentially in the course of economic reform. The cult of money essentially killed off all those who or killed off the desire of people to go into scientific and technological research. This very low time horizon that people are operating on does not produce an incentive to invest in technology. And this has a clear geopolitical consequences. It may be symbolized by the 5G problem and the software problem. Russia essentially stands between the choice of adopting either Western, primarily American, technology and technological standards, or Chinese technology and technological standards. In either way, Russia loses a significant portion of its technological sovereignty. So this vaunted sovereignty is being challenged in the ways for which at present there's essentially very little defense. Russia is trying to come up with alternatives, but I think that for the time being, these are baby steps. These are insufficient efforts. My next challenge would be demographic. Russia's population has not declined the way it was projected to decline 20 years ago. People thought that Russia would be dying out faster, much faster. Right now, the projections are slightly better, but still, in demographic terms, Russia is getting smaller, and in absolute figures, much less significant than it used to be. And in terms of the quality of the population, in terms of the health of the nation, in terms of the life expectancy, in terms of educational standards, I think Russia has been losing and continues to lose. This is a major challenge and something that cannot be remedied by importing millions of guest workers or immigrants who would be willing to come to Russia, primarily from the countries of the former Soviet Union, Central Asia, first and foremost. Again, the issue is not that Russia, which actually even, 30 years ago, Russia was the third most populated nation in the world. When the Soviet Union collapsed, its population was close to 300 million. I think it was 282 million in 89 when the last Soviet census was taken. And right now it's already in the second dozen of the most populous countries in the world. Well, or let's say on the border between the first and the second. And again, it's not just a numbers story, but the story of the lowering quality of the population and the fact that the population is getting older. That's not only Russia's problem. European countries are suffering from that. China is beginning to suffer from that. But that's a big challenge, especially for the country with the largest territory in the world. You have the largest territory, but you have very modest population for that territory. The regional challenge, regional within Russia, is also very important. When you travel in Russia, you see huge differences between different parts of the country. You have pockets of the first world in places like Moscow and St. Petersburg and some of the regional capitals, not many. But then you have areas that are closer to the third world or right out of the third world, although this whole description may be a bit dated, but there's a huge gap between different regions, and this is becoming a political issue. The wealth of Moscow, St. Petersburg, and many other principal metropolitan areas in Russia actually rests on the proceeds from natural resources that are extracted from the areas of Siberia, the far north, and elsewhere. And many of the people who live in the places where extraction of resources is taking place are not getting much out of that fact, and you have interregional friction. There is a potential for ethnic challenges in Russia, although after the collapse of the Soviet Union, excuse me, ethnic Russians who were who were on the verge of losing their majority within the Soviet Union, they are in a big majority, 80% or some such, in Russia, and yet in the Russian Federation, and yet you have a lot of other ethnic groups, nationalities that have been quiescent recently, but with the situation economic situation not terribly hopeful, tensions among ethnic groups are likely to increase, and this is a problem not just in the North Caucasus but elsewhere in the country. There's a political challenge here, the challenge of succession. President Putin, of course, is the paramount leader, and he has the constitutional right since last year to stay in office until 2036. But the issue of succession still hangs over his head. And the problem with succession is not only that Putin needs to make a wise choice. It is in the fact that you cannot hand off the authority of the presidency, or the authority that President Putin currently commands in Russia, alongside the presidential insignia, alongside the scepter and the orb, if I may use the analogy. So somebody may be crowned the president with Putin's blessing, but that somebody will not necessarily inherit Putin's real authority, which rests on the approval of his policies, very broad-ranging approval by the significant majority of the Russian people. Now, if this is not forthcoming, if the new president is not considered to be popular, maybe the word popular is wrong because it's part of the Western political vocabulary. If he is not regarded as a worthy monarch, as a true czar by the bulk of the Russian people, there may be problems with that. And those problems, in my view, as I tried to argue in my lecture yesterday, could lead to not only the fall of the regime, or the fall of the person symbolizing the regime, but of the regime itself, the state, and the country. So the stakes are very high. And very lastly, the ideological challenge and values-related challenge. After the collapse of communism and the official renunciation of any ruling ideology in Russia, which was a good thing to do. This vacuum was essentially ideological values. Vacuum was essentially filled with money or anything that could be essentially quoted in money terms. This is hugely corrosive. I think President Putin, who is de facto a czar in Russia, certainly cares about his czardom and certainly cares about his subjects, because that's what he's all about. But then the people who are nominally under his command, a lot of them, if you look at their way of life, if you look at their habits, if you look at their behavior, if you look at their property, they care about nothing other than their own well-being. And it's not just a few individuals. I mean, the story of corruption or kleptocracy doesn't capture it, because Russia was never ruled by the people who were not serving anything other than themselves. In Tsarist times, of course, they were all servants of the emperor. And in Soviet times, they were all servants of the Communist Party. And very often they had to carry out pretty heavy and dangerous duties on behalf of the crown or on behalf of communism. But not today. You have people in very high places who essentially have a second home and the preferred home very far away from Russia, who keep their money away from Russia, who educate their children away from Russia, and not for coming back to Russia and serving Russia, rather for integrating themselves into the global system. And that, I think, is something that President Putin, for all the talk of nationalizing the elite, can do almost nothing about. And this is a very big challenge. To me, this is the biggest challenge, because I think that for any development, you need to have credible leadership. You need to have people who are leading others by their own example. A system that would be based on meritocracy of sorts. But you have it when you have a system of cronies, and those cronies are only about the material thing, then it's very bad. So I don't know what will happen in Russia, but unless that changes, that last thing changes, my expectations will be very low. As we say in Russia, a fish rots from its head. So if you have an elite that is what it is, then what can you expect of those who are supposed to follow that elite? They actually do follow that elite in their own ways. And then the country, the community, society, they all suffer. So enough about domestic challenges. International, they weigh heavily on foreign policy, as you can understand. Foreign policy is not about whether Ukraine is on this side or on that side of the divide. Foreign policy is not about those things. It's about, first of all, the foundation of foreign policy: economic, technological, demographic, and all the way to ideological and values. Again, I'm not suggesting that the values of the Russian people should be identical to the values of modern Europe. I think that it's unlikely to happen for a variety of reasons, and we shouldn't be thinking in those terms. And we're clearly not trying to impose European or American values on the Russian people. The Russian people need to come up with their own set of values, which exist, but they need to impose that set of values on those who are supposed to rule over them. But that's a long haul. Now, international geopolitics. I think the biggest challenge in geopolitics for Russia will be managing Russia's position and Russia's international navigation under conditions of US-China bipolarity. To me, meeting that challenge would be assuming a position of equilibrium vis-a-vis the Sino-American rivalry, and clearly not associating ourselves with either of the two superpowers. To do so would be, in my view, committing a mistake similar to the one committed by the Russian Empire 100 years ago when it got involved in the then conflict between the two most important European rival states, the British Empire and the German Empire. And Russia clearly lost, it lost the empire, it lost itself too, and the country was had to go through the revolution and everything that followed the revolution. Equilibrium, however, does not mean equidistance. I do not suggest Russian neutrality in that fight. I'm only talking about equilibrium, not becoming involved. But for a variety of reasons, Russia is clearly closer, will be closer to China than it will be to the United States. The United States, after all, regards Russia as an adversary and continues to pile more and more sanctions and more restrictions and more pressure on Russia, whereas China is the largest trading partner and the political partner, and very importantly, a predictable neighbor. But the U.S.-China thing is very fluid. We don't know how it will go. A lot of people think that China is going to improve its international status at the expense of the United States. But it's not a given that China will sort of push the United States from the top position in many areas and claim primacy in the second half of the 21st century. The United States has enormous resources, and it can mobilize those resources. And China has a whole list of weaknesses. Some of them glaring, some of them not glaring, but they are there. So we don't know. And I think that Russia needs to be acting very resourcefully, creatively, and acting in its own interest, not in the interest of China, and certainly not selling itself to the United States for the purpose of containing China in the north. That, I think, would be supreme fallacy and supreme stupidity. The next challenge to Russia, I think, is the evolution of the United States itself, the adaptation of American foreign policy to what Fareed Zakaria a few years ago called the post-American world. I think that the process of adaptation is going to be very painful, and at times it can get dangerous. The more so that the image of the United States in the last 4 years prior to the most recent election, actually not the election, prior to the inauguration itself, was that of a country that did not look very predictable internally. And, all those notions of a cold civil war in the United States, whatever, it may be an exaggeration, I think it is an exaggeration. But certainly there's something going on within the United States that has revealed to us all in the last 4 or 5 years, something that we essentially hadn't known about the United States. So we have to take the United States more seriously. It's a country that can go different ways within itself, and making things a bit harder for the rest of the world, not only to understand the United States, but to deal with it. And Russia, I think, paid a heavy price for the during this infighting within the United States, being associated with Donald Trump, being seen as an object of domestic American politics, if you like, a country turned into an American political football, kicked by all sides for 4 years. That's not a very cheerful prospect. And do not misunderstand me. I think that Russia certainly made some wrong decisions, and part of the rhetoric was absolutely self-defeating. Some of the expectations that many Russians had over Donald Trump were absolutely delusionary. So Russia, in a way, was helpful or was willing to be adopted by the world of American politics of that famous football, but it was a very unpleasant experience. Under Biden, I think things are certainly more predictable, but managing confrontation, I think it's going to be confrontation all the way between the United States and Russia, as far as I can see. It's not the Cold War, because as a veteran of the Cold War who, served on both sides of the famous Cold War divide, I understand that you can never re-enter the river. It's always different, and any analogy to the Cold War can be only misleading. But it's still a confrontation. It's a different kind of confrontation, and dangerous in its own way. But this confrontation will continue. The best we can hope for and work for is managing it, as I said, and regulating it to the extent possible. The European Union is another foreign policy challenge. And I think that the European Union has been taken far too lightly by Russian foreign policy. It was considered to be the softer West. The United States is the hard West. The European Union is the soft West. And I think it's very wrong, because soft or not, the European Union could be, in many ways, a more serious problem for Russia than the United States, and a problem that's more difficult to deal with. The United States is out there. The United States is essentially about deterrence, and you can manage your security vis-a-vis the United States by deterrence plus maybe some arms control or confidence building agreements. The European Union is a neighbor, a very close neighbor, a neighbor that knows you inside out, parts of it, pretty well. A neighbor that is composed of many countries, with some of which, the more important ones, you think, you have bearable relations, but the solidarity within the European Union makes it clear that it's the countries that have the lowest opinion of you and that bear a huge historical grudge against you that rule the day. And you cannot overrule them. You may be this hegemon or so-called hegemon Germany. You can have this great power France with all its grandeur, but the Russia policy will be essentially decided uh, by how much the Poles and the Balts and the Romanians will allow. And this is an unpleasant revelation for the Russians, and I don't think they have understood yet how to deal with the European challenge. The challenge of China, as I said, right now and for the foreseeable future, China is a partner. I even use a word for the relationship that is between partnership and alliance, and my word is for that is entente. There's a high degree of understanding, mutual understanding between the elites and leaders of China and Russia. There are many interests that link the two countries, economic, technological, and others, geopolitical. The United States adversity toward both China and Russia adds a certain pressure on the two countries to come a bit closer, but let me say that it's not the prime cause. American pressure, that is not the prime cause of Sino-Russian entente. So the relationship may be fine, and Putin and Xi, as long as they remain in office, which will be some time, are unlikely to break their relationship. But what happens after that is a question mark. And if the Chinese, let me put it this way, the problem for Russia is how the Chinese use their new power. What kind of a superpower China will become. And we haven't known China in that position, apart from China being the center of its world, when all the neighboring countries were treated essentially as tributary states politically and as barbarians culturally. I don't think we're going down that path, but we'll see. United States model for world dominance is called leadership. What the Chinese model will be, I don't know, but it's a very important question. I don't have an answer to that question. I have an answer to another question. What happens when China leans too hard on Russia? I think the two countries will fall out. It's like, and this is an argument I use with my Chinese colleagues when we discuss the future. I tell them that right after the Chinese communists established the People's Republic in October '49, Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai went to the Soviet Union. First Zhou Enlai and then Mao Zedong. And Zhou Enlai, right after his arrival in the Soviet Union, and the Communist Party of China was very much, as you can imagine, was very much dependent on Soviet assistance. But the moment he arrived in the Soviet Union, the moment he started talking with Soviet leaders, he said, well, one thing you need to understand is that China is a great power. Now, this is something that the Soviet leaders of the day did not really take very seriously. Well, Mao and Zhou could put up with Stalin, whom they regarded a demigod or something like that, and feared and all that. But when Stalin was no more and Khrushchev came to replace him, they changed tack very dramatically. And essentially, Mao Zedong did not care about Soviet assistance, which was enormous, very much on the par, if not bigger than the Marshall Plan for Europe. It was huge assistance. And he was prepared to risk all that in the name of asserting China as a great power. He didn't want to be the Soviet Union's vice president of the or vice general secretary of the communist world, something that Khrushchev was not willing to give him. And the Soviet Union treated China as one of the countries that it controlled, one of the members of the socialist camp, but it wanted to be unequal. So China, I think, will see a very different Russia if Russians come to the conclusion that China is going to lord over them. That will be the end of the relationship. But hopefully this time never comes, and Russia will be able to keep balance in relations with China. There are certain things where China, many things where China is the leader and the hegemon vis-a-vis Russia, but on some other things, Russia still holds primacy. Things like the geopolitical situation, things like fresh water, things like nuclear, whatever it's worth today. Certainly, even today, that is one technological area where China trails Russia. I will not talk about India, Japan, and regional players such as Turkey, regional situations such as Afghanistan, etc. Let me finish by talking about opportunities. I won't name many opportunities to deal with those challenges, but I think one thing that Russia needs to come up with is some sort of an organizing idea, an organic organizing idea for domestic and foreign policy, but primarily for foreign policy. Russia needs to focus on itself in this world. Russia should not be about the world order. Let China and the United States and some other nations fight over it. I think Russia's role in the next, Russia's main thrust in the next couple of decades should be squarely on itself. And it needs to, in my view, to build an equilibrium in its policies across the board on the dual principle of law and justice. They're not they're not overlapping. Sometimes they're difficult to integrate into one approach, but that's the way forward. Certainly law. You need a law to build a state. In my view, Russia today is more of a regime than it is a state. A regime is a huge progress compared to the chaos of the 1990s, but it still falls short of being a regular state, a full-fledged state. And state is based on law, and I think that's where Russia should be moving. But law should be married to justice, because in the Russian mind, what's just trumps what's legal. My next point in terms of opportunities would be what I would call neighborhood policy. Focus on your neighbors, starting with your friends, not many, but still, Belarus and Kazakhstan and several other countries. And China falls into that category formally, but we've already talked about China. But trying to gradually change the relationship with the European Union, not through concessions a la Gorbachev. There are very few things that can be done without serious damage to the Russian interest, but stopping doing stupid things, focusing on the things that can be done even now. There are many things that can subtly start changing the attitudes among the Europeans. And finally, instead of trying to find a scheme for integration in the former Soviet Union, put gathering people above gathering lands. Russia's policies have traditionally been focused on gathering lands, former lands of the Kievan Rus, the lands of neighbors, so that those lands become Russia's buffers vis-a-vis other countries rather than become staging ground for outside powers to pressure Russia, and build the Russian world, first of all, within Russia's borders. And to me, the guiding principle of Russia's policies across the world, and this has a lot to do with the central thesis of my book, is equilibrium. Both an equilibrium within Russia, basic agreement about things, equilibrium with neighbors, neighborliness, and equilibrium vis-a-vis all others. To be an independent player, but not try to claim dominance in any part of the world. And very finally, my idea for Russia's foreign policy going forward is to try to turn your liability into your asset, turn the confrontation with the West into a stimulus for self-improvement, starting with rotating the elite and building an elite based on professionalism, meritocracy, the ability to serve the people, and rediscover such outdated or seemingly outdated notions as duty and honor. Maybe it's a retired officer who speaks of me at this moment, but that's what I am. Thank you very much. That'll be all as far as the lecture is concerned. Thank you.